Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. A lot happening in the world of trade. One of the commodities that is very important in the Canada-U.S. trade relationship is canola. Joining us right now to chat about that relationship is Chris Davison. He is President and CEO of the Canola Council of Canada. Chris, it's great to chat with you.
Thanks for having me today, Sean.
Okay, I guess, Chris, I'll ask you off the top. Is the threat of tariffs over between Canada and the U.S.?
I wish I could say it was, but I think realistically that would be the wrong conclusion to draw. I think we had a welcome pause to the proceedings as of Monday this week, but I think we've got a road ahead of us that we still have to navigate in terms of tariffs and just the trade relationship in general, Sean.
In some commodities, it's a one-way trade. Canola is an example where the canola industry, because there's an industry, there's acres in North Dakota, there's obviously acres in Western Canada, there's a few in Ontario. What kind of impact would a 25% tariff or a retaliation tariff, because canola was on that list in that initial 21 billion, what kind of impact would that have on the canola industry?
Yeah, I think we can talk about that from a couple of perspectives. So let's start from the Canadian side of the equation, and you know that the U.S. is our number one market for canola. In 2023, that export value was $8.6 billion. About 6.3 billion of that was tied to canola oil, another 2 billion to canola meal, and some seed in that mix as well. So, the imposition of tariffs by the U.S. On Canada at the levels that were being talked about would have a negative and widespread impact. And that would start with Canadian farmers who grow canola every year. It would extend to companies who provide them with seed and other inputs that are required to grow the crop. To grain companies and processors who contract for that crop, and ultimately, exporters that move Canadian seed oil and meal to the United States and other markets. But you raise a really good point, and you talk about the two-way trade and the cross-border relationship, Sean. One of the things that we know is we have a highly integrated canola industry with the United States. And the benefits of that relationship accrue to consumers, producers, and businesses on both sides of the border.
Yeah. Well, Chris, also, there's canola that's grown in the Dakotas that is pulled into crush plants in Manitoba.
Well, let me elaborate on that. So when I talk about a highly integrated industry, the benefits really do accrue at all stages of the value chain on both sides of the border. So if we're talking about the United States side, you have refining and processing that happens there. You have transportation that happens there. You have bottling and packing that happens there. You have food end uses. You have livestock benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So it truly is integrated. And the economic impact of Canadian grown canola on the U.S. market is significant. We recently completed an economic impact assessment that looked at the impact of Canadian grown canola in the U.S., and it is very significant. It highlighted north of $11 billion U.S. of economic activity annually, about $1.2 billion U.S. in wages, and thousands of jobs. So both sides of the border.
How concerned are you about the political risk that is in the marketplace, especially, as you look at the broader canola market? We've talked a lot about this increasing domestic canola crush. Obviously, there's a merger that was approved between Bunge and Viterra. You don't need to comment on that specifically. I'm just talking about the broader, crush capacity build here. If there is, because of protectionism from the U.S., if we start to see lack of ability to participate in things like the RFS or the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the tax breaks, is that a threat to the Canadian crush build?
Well, I think all of these things are challenges to the industry and across the value chain, as I alluded to earlier. Obviously, the very significant investments that the Canadian industry made in expansion of domestic crush capacity, very, very significant for us. And I would add a really good initiative, if I can call it that, in terms of helping to try and de-risk some of our trade by having more value-added activity happening in Canada. So we are super excited about that, but we have to meet the demand that those investments require in order to realize their benefits, Sean, for sure.
How big of a play is the fact that canola acres are kind of tapped out? I'll be honest. I get once in a while, I'll get an email or a phone call from somebody in the U.S. who says, there's a lot of opportunity for renewable diesel. Canada, you got to figure out how to grow more canola. Like what? Why aren't acres like 30 or 35 million? Because there seems to be the kind of demand out there for it. And I say it's not that simple. Is there any concern about the acres being sort of tapped out at that 22 million?
I don't think that's the primary focus at this point in time. I think we all recognize and believe that there's still significant room for production and productivity improvements, largely on the same acres we've got, maybe with some incremental acres in there. But as you know, there are other considerations in terms of rotation, disease management, et cetera, et cetera. And if we want to make sure we're getting the best from the canola crop, we need to account for those things as well. So I think there's some room there for incremental acres, but we know hopefully with technology advancements that are coming and other tools that are or will be available, we still believe that there's significant room for productivity growth.
Yeah. So from a communication standpoint, going forward here, because as you stated, the threat of tariffs is not going away. There's a 30-day breathing period here, but I think we're going to be talking about this for a while, on again, off again, for sure. What's your communication strategy kind of look like here going forward from the Canola Council standpoint on this topic?
Yeah, look, highly engaged already, and as you allude to, we anticipate that to continue. And that engagement happens on a number of different levels. Certainly very important that we're collaborating with our industry colleagues here in Canada and also with the federal and provincial governments. And that's already taking place and I expect will only intensify going forward. But I think, I come back to what I said about the benefits on both sides of the border. We clearly recognize that we've got a highly valued, economically significant relationship that delivers those benefits on both sides of the border. So making sure we have engagement with our U.S. stakeholders is absolutely critical as well. We think that economic story that I alluded to with you a few minutes ago is very much in line with what the new administration in the U.S. has said they want to do for consumers and for the U.S. economy. And we are going to continue to work even harder to make sure that is well known and understood south of the border, so that ultimately we're doing our part to help to ensure that decisions are made on the best available information.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the Canada-U.S. relationship, but before I let you go, I want to ask you too, how much political risk is there in terms of the clean fuel regulation, the CFR in Canada, and what that future looks like?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of adjacent issues that you've alluded to, and certainly we are supportive of wanting to have a strong national market for biofuels. I'll just call biofuels policy generally.
Yeah.
And I guess my comment would be that in the face of some of the challenges that we're experiencing now with the U.S. market and elsewhere, having a strong domestic market takes on even more importance moving forward. So we recognize these are policy-driven markets. They're subject to changes in policy changes in government. But I would argue that now more than ever, having a strong domestic biofuels market is really, really critical.
Hey, Chris, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for your time, Sean.
Hey, that is Chris Davison, President and CEO of the Canola Council of Canada. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments on what you heard there from my conversation with Chris, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com.